Before My Heart Gives Out by Kira 18 on AO3. Chapter 29. Who Lives, Who Dies. In the twilight, the fabric of the world felt muted in its hues, waiting patiently for dawn, for it to ignite the earth with color, for all to see. In the darkness that bathed his room, Shinsou felt as though the air moved like cool water, sluggish and smooth, slowing down reality as if time itself was frozen, a sanctuary from the rest of the world. The paper felt rough in his hand, wrinkled and stained with time. Nevertheless, his fingers ghosted against it reverently, holding it as if it was the most precious thing in existence. Slowly, leisurely, he deposited it into his drawer that laid open on his desk next to him. With one last, longing look, he closed the drawer. The soft thump of wood, the only sound that pierced the air, disturbing the silence that had settled like a blanket over him. Looking ahead at the body-length mirror positioned in front of him, his reflection stares back at him mockingly. The suit he was wearing felt stiffening and constricting, despite its comfortable size. With quivering fingers, he picked up the black tie that was draped over the mirror stand. His hands shake, fingers trembled, restlessly, as he tried to gain some semblance of control over his limbs. Frustration coils inside of him, only serving to increase the unsteadiness he feels down to his core. He felt as though he was trapped in a dream, a nightmare, as if he's waddling through thick layers of distorted reality. Despair and a deep, overwhelming sadness penetrates his atmosphere around him. None of the thick layers stick to him, though. He's disconnected from the walking realm, watching through a thinly drawn veil as the world crumbles down around him. It feels wrong to be here, unfair and devastating, to be alive when he was not. The quaking of his fingers increase, and he finds himself violently ripping the tie from his throat. The action knocks his elbow against the mirror. The structure wobbles, but doesn't break. He finds himself wishing it had, wishing he could watch it crack under the pressure, shatter into a million tiny pieces, because then he wouldn't be the only broken thing resigning in the room. With a shallow sob, a cracking sound that barely escapes his throat, he falls to the ground, knees hitting the hardwood floor painfully. His hands snake his hair, digging into his scalp. The pain serves to ground him, an anchor of sorts, distracting him from the storm of emotions that brew within him, because anything is better than this overwhelming sense of loss and emptiness he feels, contracting and expanding deep within his chest, into his very heart. Low light floods the room as a figure steps in. Without looking up, Shinsou already knows who it is. It doesn't stop him from flinching, as tentative fingers slowly unravel his hands from his tight grip onto his hair. Calloused fingers, warm against his skin. Aizawa holds them with a gentleness he never expected from the man, as if the teen before him was made of delicate, fragile porcelain, at risk of breaking at any given moment. No words are exchanged between them. There is no need for it. Aizawa crouches in front of him, his hands coming up to wrap around him. Shinsou can do nothing but let the silent tears he's been holding back trickle down his face. He lets go, because soon he'll have to pull himself up, glue the damaged pieces like a broken child's toy, stick them back together long enough to get through the day. In the dark, through bloodshot eyes, he lets his gaze settle on his teacher. The man looks like he's aged 10 years, dark circles drilled into his face, making him look incredibly exhausted, more so than usual. His eyes speak of the same sorrow that Shinsou feels, scorching in his heart, ripping at the seams of his very being. Wordlessly, the man picks up the tie that now lay discarded on the floor. The process of wrapping it around Shinsou's neck is methodical, slow, and prolonged. They're both stalling, wanting to hold on to the moment before it slips away, before reality inevitably sets in. Straightening the collar of his dress shirt, the man swipes at invisible dust on his shoulder, nodding, as if to convey a silent message, as if he was declaring Shinsou ready. His eyes were serious and heavy with meaning. He was telling him that he could get through this. They both could. Together. It's time, isn't it? He asked, voice small, as fragile as he felt in the moment. It is. Aizawa's voice is rough, as if he'd been screaming. They walk out of the room, shoulder to shoulder. Despite the silent support, Shinsou has never felt more alone. 1 week prior, his wrist burned, the strain from his current position pulling painfully on his joints. The bag over his head prevented him from breathing properly. The gag the villain had shoved into his mouth a few minutes ago served only to worsen his condition. His chest heaved with the effort to keep his body standing, trying his hardest to take some of the weight off his aching shoulders. The chains clinked and chimed with every micro-movement his body made. His senses working on overdrive as he tried to make sense of the world around him. Shigaraki had finished setting up his camera. However, instead of starting the recording, the man had wandered to another part of the room. A new villain had joined them a while ago, one Izuku could not recognize despite his hardest attempts to placing the man. The objects they were fiddling with was completely obscure to Izuku's senses. No electricity current circulated within them. No obvious shape adorned it. It was an unknown, and Izuku didn't like it. Not one bit. Are you sure the second one is ready? Izuku was grateful for the villain's ignorance of his powers. His senses could easily pick up on their conversation. It's ready. You just have to go through with it. The newcomer left shortly after, only letting out a grunt in acknowledgement before disappearing out of the building altogether. Now that that's done, we can begin, Shigaraki announced, sardonically, picking off the camera off its stand and bringing it closer to his face. His position obscured Shadow's form. For now, the only thing visible to the camera was the villain himself in close up. Fiddling momentarily with the computer, plopped next to the camera, he pressed the recording button. The students of Class 1A are all gathered in the hospital waiting room when it begins. At least, the ones that are not currently being treated, or are still unconscious, since they were brought here after the attack at the camp. The silence rests heavily in the room around them. Todoroki can see it weighing heavily on everyone. Everyone is moving, pacing, or fidgeting. Moving, but not talking or interacting. As if every one of them is lost in their own world, trapped by their thoughts. Todoroki himself can't help but replay every interaction he's ever had with Midoriya, over and over in his mind. He remembers wondering what he could have done even as the warp gate closed behind the boy. Uraraka walks back and forth to the door separating them from the emergency care unit, as if her movements will somehow summon the doctors and simultaneously bring good news. On either side of him sit Shinsou and Bakugo. Both haven't uttered a word since they got here. Shinsou keeps checking his phone every few minutes. His disappointment rises with each empty lock screen he faces. Todoroki can see it. In the slump of his shoulders, the tapping of his foot. It's the only sound that penetrates the silence. It only serves to amplify everyone's nerves, making them excruciatingly aware of the slow passing of time. Kirishima and Ida are the only ones who are not completely catatonic, amidst the smaller cluster of friends, both for very different reasons. However, Todoroki was certain that if it weren't for Ida's position as class president, the boy would surely be visibly panicking by now. The teen hides his anxiety well, choosing to channel it instead of asking every passing nurse multiple theoretical, thought-out questions about the injured students. Hiroshima is the only one who looks remotely hopeful. He has been like this ever since Yaozu told him she planted a tracker on one of the villains, the one with the magnets, in particular. The class hadn't agreed with his plan to go out and search for Midoriya on their own. It had created a sort of rift between them and the rest of the class. Surprisingly, Ida and Uraraka had immediately agreed to help. Both of them felt like they owed the Vigilante, not to mention the friendship that they had cultivated within the teen in the short time they had known him. Shinsou didn't even have to answer. The boy had been planning his own search and rescue operation even before they had any kind of lead on Midoriya's location. Bakugo, for his part, had to be physically restrained before he agreed to wait. The boy was all but ready to go out there, hands blazing. Todoroki himself wanted to save his friend, even if it meant doing something potentially illegal and destroying whatever trust they had garnered with their teachers and their school. He's never had any friends before this year. He learned to cherish the very few people he cared for. Midoriya, in that short time he had spent with the team, had managed to break through most of his offenses and found himself a spot on that short list. Breaking out of his momentarily contemplation, his attention is drawn to a nurse. The woman enters the room in a hurry, hands clutching a remote. He watches, curiously, as she aims the object at the TV hanging on the wall on the far side of the room. The dark display lights up with life. A news anchor could be seen talking on camera. Breaking news! A national-wide broadcast of a villain organization who calls himself the League of Villains is about to be shown live. Internet analysis predicts this to be one of the most widely viewed internet events in Japanese history. What the hell? Bakugo's voice was low as he spoke, his eyes wide as he stared at the screen. The rest of the class wore a similar expression as they straightened in their seats. The room settled to drop a couple of degrees in temperature as the anticipation and dread rose in the air. Turn up the volume. When the nurse made no move to do so, Shinsou repeated the blonde's request, voice harsher, as his anxiety increased. They watched with bated breath as the countdown started, and painstakingly dwindled to nothing. The numbers displayed 10 seconds only. However, to them, it felt like an entire eternity later that the feed finally began. Shigaraki was holding the video camera close to his face. He was decked out in full costume, down to the disembodied hands attached to his face and body, covering his eyes and most of his features. The only thing visible was his manic grin. His voice was sharp and jeered as he spoke. The red sheen of his eyes seemed to grow within the shadows casted by the appendage. Greetings, citizens of Japan. The villain introduced himself, broadcasting about havoc and chaos he's been creating for the past year. But we're not here to talk about that. No, tonight I have a special guest. This shadow you've all been hearing whispers about. The one mysteriously saving people these past years. Well, you're finally going to see the man behind the mask. The villain moved the camera back to its place on the stand. The lens was momentarily blocked by the villain's body as the man reached for something off-screen. His breath caught in his throat, and Shigaraki moved away. From the corner of his eye, he could see Shinsou's hand tightened its grip on the chair he was sitting on, knuckles white with the pressure. There, beaten and bloodied, hanging from shackles chaining his wrists to the ceiling, was Shadow. His costume, despite the numerous tears in it, was easily recognizable. His face was covered by a black bag. However, the little skin was visible, was covered in molten blue and purple bruises, covering his skin like paint on a canvas. It made his blood boil, looking at the state of his friend. He never felt more helpless. more useless. All they could do was watch as the villain approached the boy, a clutch now visible in his hands. The familiar crimson red of Midoriya's walking stick contrasted greatly with the gray and black grime that seemed to cover the surfaces of the walls around them. However, the lighting of the room made it impossible to discern its content, nor any useful identifying element. It made the frustration bubble up inside him, like boiling water on a hot stove, threatening to spill to the surface. He's never had any difficulty holding back his emotions. It seemed Midoriya was, once again, the exception to the rule. You see, the vigilante you're all so proud of, the one the heroes have been trying so damn hard to catch, the one the villains have been cowering and fearing for years, is nothing but a pathetic, blind kid. The man spits the words, his voice dripping with venom, as his hands come down to clutch at the bag covering Izuku's face from the world. The fabric, like the hood of his costume, disintegrated in a fury of ash, draping the floor with another layer of dust, adding to the filth. Shigaraki grinned manically, 4 fingers digging into the boy's scalp, forcing his head back, exposing his face to the camera, to the world. Shadow's mouth was gagged, preventing him from uttering a single word. Blood oozed from a wound at his forehead, methodically. His face, to their horror, mirrored the state of his body in bruises. They could see the panic and pain he was trying so hard to hide. However, the thing that seemed to draw the most attention was his eyes. His pale, milky green eyes seemed to pierce right through the screen, as if he were looking right at them, into their very souls. His gaze was unfocused, filled to the brim with both resignation and frustration. "Never meet your heroes, kid," the villain snarled darkly, letting go of Shadow's head abruptly, surely putting a couple of strands of hair on the process. "They just tend to be so disappointing," the man continued, oblivious to the chaos he was wrecking, the distress he was causing to the people witnessing his actions. "I have a lot of things planned out, but first..." The villain twisted the walking stick in his grip, splitting the metal crutch through the air. "I'm gonna show you why you should never play at being heroes." The sound of the rods hitting flesh sounded through the waiting room. The hit came swiftly and brutally. The villain had struck the teen right in the face, his head turning with the momentum and power behind the hit. He could hear the sharp intake of breath coming through Uraraka as Shigaraki struck again, this time hammering the boy right in the stomach. Midoriya's pained breath seemed to play on loop in his mind. His wheezing, heavy breathing, made his heart ache. Isn't it nice to be on the receiving end? With one last hit, this time catching the teen in his side, the chains rattled as the vigilante's body was pushed by the force. They could see the mounting anger in the vigilante's eyes. Straining up from the fighting stance, the villain faced back the recording device, gazed dark and serious as he threw the slick to the ground, already bored with it. "Now that that's over with, we can get to the interesting part." His tone promised nothing good as he procured a remote from his pocket pants. He could already feel his heart drop at the realization slowly starting to dawn at him. Looking at his friend, he could see it in their eyes, the implication dropping on them like cold water, washing over them in waves. The moment his fingers connected with the big red button adorning the object, a monitor lit up above the chalked teen. On the pixelated screen, in big red lettering, was another countdown. He regretted it now. His earlier wish for the numbers to dwindle faster. There, displayed for the world to see, was a mark of 60 minutes. The numbers, like the fate of the boys chained under them, was already running their course. Fuck you. Fuck you. With that fucking future part. Fuck you. Because we know that's gonna happen. Obviously, that wasn't to show us, oh, Izuku's gonna die. We know that's gonna happen. You know why that was put there? To hit us emotionally. Because I think, in my opinion, the most brutal thing of a death is the emotions that the characters around the death feel. The characters that obviously care deeply for the person who died feels. That is what hits you hard. That is what breaks you. It really does. Do not get me wrong. The death itself is always brutal. You're always left crying. But what shatters you, what drops you, what is the final nail in the coffin is always the reaction of the people around that character. And for fucking Kira 18 to show us how how Shinsou and Aizawa react. That's mean. Because now we know that it's gonna shatter them, right? We know that Aizawa looks even more dead, looks like he hasn't slept. We already know that Shinsou is quite literally angry at the world, feels broken, alone, and just can't even face reality. His coping mechanism is quite literally, what's that called? Disorientation? Dissociation, right? And that hurts, because I know that these characters are gonna be in pain, and now you're telling me that they're gonna watch as Izuku dies? That's mean. That is mean. That is cruel. That is cruel. That is mean. And I hate that you're a good writer, because this wouldn't be as heartbreaking and as gut-punching as it is right now, and I'm telling you right now, this is getting a fucking bookmark. And I'm recommending it to friends because I can't suffer alone. God. I don't cry like this often. Okay, that's a lie, but I feel like this is gonna haunt my dreams. Like, I feel like this is something that we're gonna finish, and we're gonna think about afterwards. I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna want to talk about it. I'm gonna want someone to sit and talk about. This is like a death that's literally gonna be embedded in my soul, in my heart. And I've only ever felt that with two other medias. Well, yeah, two other medias. Banana Fish, and they both die at the end. Well, the series, right? The first book and the second book. Really. You just had to do this, Kira 18. You just had to grab that stake and impale us in the heart. I really thought that Izuku was gonna die in this chapter. I was mentally preparing myself, and now I don't know. You might just prolong it just to fuck with us. Okay. I'm distressed, as you could tell. And the next chapter is called Shattered. And that's what I'm feeling. I'm pretty sure that's what the viewers are feeling. And Kira 18, I want you to tell me, did you feel sad while writing this? Because I know I would. Sitting here, I would be sobbing. And, oh, really? Really? This song had to play 4th of July? Really? Really? I'm gonna throw my phone across the room later today. Okay. Okay, we could get through this, guys. We can get through this. We're... Think of the bright side. As long... You guys are experiencing this with me. We're experiencing it together, and we could cope together, and we can, you know, talk about it together. And I think that it's what I love about comment sections, especially in my YouTube channel, and the comment section of obviously the fanfic itself. And God, I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna sob. I can't. I'm actually in pain. Oh, okay. As always, my raindrops. Make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content. And thank you so much for watching.